It having reached the hour of 5:30 p.m., I am calling the August 11th, 2022 Special City Council Workshop to order and ask the city clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Ricky,
Present.
Councilmember Canoyer, Vice Mayor Wright,
Here.
Councilmember Scutia Brayton,
Here.
Councilmember Madrigal, and Mayor Zwalin.
Here. Would everyone please rise for the pledge to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will begin with the public comment period, and this is for items that are not on the council agenda. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak. For our Spanish speakers in person or on Zoom, we have a Spanish interpreter available for those who want to offer their feedback during public comment. To access written translation during the meeting, please scan the QR code or click the link on tonight's agenda. And now I will ask Roberto Rodriguez to please read what I just said in Spanish.
Si alguien desea hablar, hacer un comentario durante la reunión, estos comentarios se pueden, que no están en la agenda de la reunión de hoy, tienen 3 minutos para hablar. Para las personas que están en Zoom, tenemos un intérprete en castellano, en español, disponible para aquellos que quieren ofrecer su comentario durante el momento de los comentarios públicos. Para acceso a la interpretación en español durante la reunión, por favor escaneen el QR code que se llama, es un recuadro lleno de puntitos negros y con 3 esquinas, que se llama, de una aplicación que se llama Wordly, la cual le va a poner todo lo que se está hablando en español en letritas de molde abajo. Gracias.
Thank you. So at this time, is there anyone that would like to speak regarding something that is not on tonight's agenda? I do not see anyone in person. I just have one card, but that is, as far as I can see, for the item that we were talking about tonight, Forward Together. And I do not see any hands raised online. So we will begin with our item for the workshop. This is a presentation by members of Forward Together of their recommendations regarding policies and practices, alternate response models, and accountability. Welcome. Thank you everyone for being here tonight for this important workshop. When I was elected mayor, forming the Forward Together work group was something that mattered to me deeply. I know that the degree to which any community trusts its law enforcement plays a critical role in public safety and wellness. Modesto is no different. The council launched this work group with a listening session in May 2021 and formally launched the Forward Together work group in June of 2021. Based on our listening session, we asked this group of community volunteers to research and reflect on the following: policies and procedures that support safety, fairness, and equity throughout the department and the community; alternate response models that ensure the correct type of response and resources are applied to a situation; accountability for police conduct, decisions, and how they impact the Modesto community. At this time, I'll invite one of our partners in this work, Kate Trumpeter, to also share some opening remarks and background on the process. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm only going to take a few minutes to just remind folks about where we started, in addition to the mayor's comments, and then just share a few words about how my colleague Michael Baldwin and I helped to design this process over the last year plus. Excellent. Okay. So Mayor Zwollen has already shared what the catalyst was for the work of this work group. The City Council formed this work group officially, if you'll recall, in June, after having hosted a listening session where we invited the community to come and offer their feedback, perspectives, and experiences to you all as you thought about how to design this work going forward. You'll also recall that the way that you formed this group was that you reached out to diverse community stakeholder groups, organizations specifically, and you asked them to bring somebody forward who would be willing to give many hours of their time over the course of approximately a year to review and research the 3 focus areas that you handed to them and develop ultimately recommendations that they would bring back to you, which they have successfully done. A little bit about the timeline. I'm not going to go through every single thing, but you can see that we hosted our first Forward Together work group in July after the group having been formed in June. We proceeded to do our due diligence of electing a chairperson, a vice chairperson, or co-chairperson, and also made some decisions about how we were going to make sure this group got as educated as possible throughout the time that we spent together. Our full work group meetings were, of course, subject to the Brown Act, and the community was invited to join us. Very thankful for those who came to express their viewpoints. And what we did is we used our large work group meetings as opportunities for the group to learn together so that we could do that in community with community, and everybody would be receiving the same information at the same time. One of the things that I want to just speak about very briefly was the choice that we made to also have our ad hoc groups meet in a more private setting, which I know was not what everybody wanted because this is public work and it should be done in public. And my colleague Michael Baldwin and I advocated for a hybrid option because we feel strongly that this kind of change work, when it can be as polarizing and activating for folks as it is, for very obvious reasons, sometimes needs to not be in a fishbowl. And so we stand by that decision to create a space where folks with divergent viewpoints, people who disagree very strongly about very important issues, could be in a space together and say what they needed to say so that we could actually move to real alignment around a set of recommendations that was based in shared understanding, deep empathy, and real curiosity for how people arrive at their viewpoints. So those ad hoc group meetings were happening, of course, throughout this entire process. As soon as we had a presentation on, for instance, policies and procedures, the policies and procedures ad hoc group would form, and they would begin their work and then come back to our large work group meetings to report out on their findings and their learnings. I also would just say that as we reached the draft recommendation stage, which was just a couple, 3 months ago, we took this on the road in a couple of ways. So what you'll also see in the presentation was part of the community engagement strategy that we tried to deploy by visiting with groups like the Stanislaus NAACP, Faith in the Valley. We also went to the Modesto Police Officers Association and talked a little bit about the recommendations with that group. So we know that the community engagement is not complete, and we feel strongly that no process like this should be done without them, and that's one reason why you are hosting this event tonight, so that people can ask questions, and we certainly commend that work. So I just want to comment on a couple more things before I invite Will Kelly, our chairperson, to come up and allow me to stop talking. One thing about the presentation, so there are the 3 sections, the 3 focus areas that you handed to this group. We're going to go through them in their entirety. The presentation won't be that long. I know that sometimes it feels like when presentations are long, you can't track your questions, but what we are doing is strategic. This set of recommendations builds on itself. So if we only present to you about what the findings were in policies and practices, you'll likely have questions that would be answered when they talk about their recommendations in accountability, as an example. So we're just inviting you to track your questions as Will goes through the presentation, and then there will be time for questions after we're done. And the other thing I just want to mention about the design for this work is that we used a process and a tool called the gradients of agreement. The set of recommendations that are being offered to you doesn't represent, everybody saying, I'm 100% on board, everything about this report is perfect, and you should do it all. Too often when we talk about our change work, we offer very binary choices, right? So we have this 10-page report, and we say, do you like it or do you not? Yes or no. And the gradients of agreement allowed people to declare that maybe they were a 3, and what they really needed to see in order to move to a 4 or a 5 would be like this small thing in the report. And I point that out because I cannot express enough appreciation, respect, and gratitude to the work that this group did to tell the truth and to ask their questions and to take advantage of those moments when it was maybe one very small thing that needed to change in that report so that they could be aligned and bring something forward that really represented a lot of very diverse views coming together around an issue that's of importance to everybody in this community. And I also just want to call out that there's stuff in this report that everybody loves, and there's stuff in it that people aren't sure about, and they're trusting you, right, to take those recommendations and do the next right thing. And the last thing I just want to say is, on the note of appreciation, I certainly want to thank the city staff, Kahlua Barnes in particular, who is retired, for the sort of tireless, not sort of, entirely tireless efforts that they put into pulling this off logistically and from a design perspective. I want to thank my colleague Mike Baldwin, who is a fearless partner in any sort of change work, but I mostly just want to take this opportunity and a microphone to thank the work group. You have people on the work group who put in more hours than I could possibly begin to count on a very emotional issue, who came together in front of cameras and each other on a monthly basis and then did work groups. I want to call out Will Kelly in particular, who was our chairperson, who you'll hear from in a moment, that there, in many ways, he and his sort of fearless team of folks running these ad hoc groups pushed this over the finish line. And I think it's no small thing that you have this group that came together over something that could have been and was very polarizing and delivered to you something I think you should be very proud of. Okay, Will.
Welcome, Will.
Thank you, and thank you, Kate. Thank you, Mayor and City Council. Yeah, I just want to start by reiterating that this was not easy work, right? This was there was a lot at stake. This was a large group with a lot of different points of view, and I think we all can be incredibly proud of the way we came together, the way we found common ground. And I think this year that we've spent on this is clearly time well spent, and it would not be possible to move forward without the work, and it speaks to the wisdom of the approach that the city took to taking on this very difficult issue. So now I just want to give a brief overview. You have, of course, the full report, but I want to give a brief overview of the recommendations, and then we'll certainly have time for questions. I'm the one with the clicker, excuse me. So waiting for someone else to do it. So there were, as we described, there were three areas of focus that were specified by the council: alternate response, policies and practices, and accountability. So starting with alternate response, this was the area where we found immediate common ground and consensus on all levels. Just for the public, the idea of alternate response is, to editorialize just slightly, is that police are asked not just to be law enforcement officers, but sometimes to be social workers and mental health professionals and a whole slew of other responsibilities. And the idea behind this philosophy that I think is growing, not just here in Modesto, but all across the country, is that we should have more than one option. There should be alternate response models. A lot of people are familiar with the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon, which is often cited as one of the first. And there are hundreds, maybe thousands of these programs blossoming all over the country, including here in Modesto. So this was something from the perspective of the community, from the perspective of mental health stakeholders, from the perspective of, in every interaction I had, law enforcement, leadership, and rank and file officers. And from perspective of the city, just making the best use of resources. This is a clear area of consensus. And one thing that was apparent right away in our meetings was the way the city and the police department and Chief Gillespie in particular were taking a data-driven approach, looking at calls for service, identifying calls that are candidates for a non-police response, and then building programs to respond to those calls and scaling them up to meet the need. So our core recommendation is to keep doing that, keep taking a data-driven approach, to keep looking for these opportunities, keep building programs, and as these things grow, there will certainly be new opportunities realized, and I'm just very excited where that work leads. For you as the council, the core thing here is to make sure that these programs are able to stay funded. Obviously, funding conversations are never easy or simple, and you have a lot of priorities, but this is something that, when done correctly, as it is being done, frees up resources, makes better use of the city's limited resources, and provides better service. And I should add that I think you have seen things related to this quite a few times in the last couple of years, and there's been a lot of successes by the city getting state funding, federal funding, county funding, and there is a lot of money out there now. The recommendation is to just ask for a commitment to do what's necessary to make sure this stays funded for the long term. You also see here some of the more specific recommendations that are in the main report. Funding to supporting the launch, which they are already launched and being scaled up all the time, allocating funding, involving the community through stakeholder groups, crisis intervention training for officers, some things about allocating funding to upgrade technology, and ensuring ongoing community oversight. The next ad hoc group or subject area I want to talk to is about is policies and practices, which policies and practices was given the most ambitious charge of any of them. I think it was basically to review all of the policies in the manual and everything police department does and make recommendations. I think we realized relatively quickly, I certainly did, and I think this was a consensus in the group, that we were not going to comprehensively tackle that task, that we certainly had a lot of really interesting discussions. I think there was a lot of learning both ways. I certainly learned a lot, covered a wide range of policy areas. But I think what we settled on pretty early is that this was going to have to be an ongoing conversation. As you know, policy making is hard and takes time and takes resources. So what we have in the report in this section is kind of a summary of the conversations we had and some ideas that were presented by at least one member of the group, and kind of a menu of options and goals for things to be considered in the future, which is kind of, as Kate alluded to, the perfect segue for talking about accountability, because that kind of ongoing work feeds exactly into this. So this was, I think, an example of something that, an idea that is scary and divisive in theory, but once we got into the kind of practical nuts and bolts of what this looked like, we converged very quickly on a model that I think that everyone in the group was able to get behind. So we had a learning session where we had law enforcement and police oversight professionals from at least 4 different jurisdictions come and talk to the group, as well as other outreach done by individual members of the work group. And we are recommending what in the terminology of these things is called a hybrid review auditor model. What that means is 2 things. So the review piece is having a community representation that can interface with the city and with the police department, that can facilitate communication in both directions, from the community to the city and from the city back to the community. Something that could look an awful lot like Forward Together, though perhaps smaller, perhaps not 27 people. That's the review piece. The auditor piece is a professional auditor. Sometimes they go by different names, but auditor is one of the more common names. Someone who has professional experience in police practices and investigations, and has access to internal affairs documents and things necessary to fulfill their prescribed function. Often is a barred attorney and has other kind of professional credentialing, and their role is to provide recommendations to the city and to the department, to also work closely with the review board, and to essentially help build trust. And that was one thing that we settled on very quickly in our discussion of this model, is that what is essential is that the auditor is someone who has the trust of all stakeholders. They cannot be seen as as a hack or as a tool for one side or the other, or any particular interest. It has to be someone that's broadly trusted. So you can see there the recommendations are spelled out, are establishing a civilian oversight board. These things go by many names. I don't think there's any attachment to that name, but that's the review piece. Contracting an independent auditor, and then establishing a major incident review team. I should mention that we also recommend that you use the City of Anaheim as a reference point in designing a system for the City of Modesto. Not that the City of Anaheim's system be cloned exactly, but that be used as a guide and a reference point for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's an example of the model we just described. We engaged with both police department leadership as well as the oversight professionals in that city, and learned a lot from them, and that informed our recommendations. And also, it is an oversight system that has existed for, I think, around a decade, and that all stakeholders are becoming more and more happy with over time, and is actually serving the function it was created for, and achieving its mission. So it has that track record of its success. So, and the major incident review team is something modeled after what they do, where they try and incorporate this oversight function in whatever ways are possible during major incidents, which obviously is when interest in this subject is most acute. The word accountability is up there in bold. Another really important word around this is transparency, right? Making sure that, to the extent allowable by law, because there are, of course, laws and restrictions, that the auditor is able to communicate their work to the community, and that's obviously essential to building trust. So with that, I just want to thank the mayor and council again for undertaking this work, and for designing, for this process, for the incredible support we've received from staff, from Kalua, and from Allison stepping in and taking over, and of course Kate and Michael. We couldn't have done this without you, and from every single member of the work group, many of whom are here tonight. It was an honor and a privilege to serve you as chair, and I just want to end by saying I think we have a lot to be proud of here, and our greatest hope is that this report leads to meaningful and positive action. We are here tonight to answer questions and to help, and we're going to continue to be here to help and engage however we can. And what we hope is that this vision is realized in a way that forwards that helps realize the very positive goals of Forward Together. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. So at this point, does the council have any questions of our presenters or staff?
Mayor, I have a question.
All right, Vice Mayor Wright.
So on your report, I was looking here, policies and practice, reduce youth arrests, particularly among Latino youth. So can you explain that?
Does this mic work? Am I good from here? Yeah, so that was, so I want to contextualize this a little bit first. That section of the report was kind of a record of several conversations we had over several months, covering a wide range of topics. These were, unlike the rest of the report, where we have presenting consensus recommendations we hope to see implemented. These were kind of a menu of options and things to look at. I want that to be clear. But that particular recommendation, that came about from first of all, from data, from looking at arrest rates, particularly juvenile arrest rates broken down by ethnicity. It also came from conversations with the department about ongoing efforts they have to work with the schools and with other stakeholders. I understand some people have responded to that saying, what does that mean? Does that mean just because someone's Latino, don't arrest them? And that's certainly not the intention there. And I think we're not here to wordsmith, but maybe there's something not fully captured in the wording there. But the idea behind that is to engage with stakeholders, to look at programs and things that reduce the need for those arrests.
So more outreach.
Yes.
More outreach
That
to
would
the
certainly be
community.
a big piece of it, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, I have a question. You mentioned during, about policies and practices.
Yeah.
That there's more work to do.
Yeah.
I realize that there's an extensive amount of policies and practices, and I know that you spent a lot of time
Yeah.
looking at those and analyzing, but do you see that we need to do more
What I
in
meant
that
specifically,
area, or-
yeah, I mean, what I meant specifically was that work continue as part of the review piece of the review auditor model. And I think policymaking is never complete, right? And I think, I mean, I don't know if this, feel free to ask a follow-up, I don't know if this gets at what you're saying, but I think the most promising things for me from these discussions were, like we were just talking about, things that revolve around partnership and would be sort of ongoing things.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so to clarify, you feel that the work that that ad hoc committee did and that your group did was thorough.
Oh, yes,
It's just,
yes.
you were referring it in
So, yes,
reference
let
to
me-
the future.
Yeah, thank you.
It seemed to me it was very thorough when
Oh,
the
certainly.
group went through the process. So
Yeah.
you're talking about in the future, whatever decision is made, that
Thank you for
that
giving me a
that
chance to clean
continue.
this up.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. The work of the Forward Together and the ad hoc group is finished and complete.
Mm-hmm.
What I meant was that I think what we have here in this section of the report is something that pieces of could go into the work of the accountability review piece if and when it's implemented. I also want to acknowledge too, giving me another chance to clean something up, that a lot of these recommendations are things that the department is already doing. And that's notated in there, but maybe not specifically line by line. So I wouldn't want it to seem like, for someone to read some of these things and say, that's a good idea, why isn't the department doing it? Many of these things are things that are or have been implemented.
All right. I guess that answers my question regarding that.
So you said in your report that the things that the department's doing are noted in there, that the.
Not specifically line by line.
I think it'd be great, Mayor, if we could get from the police department what things in here are already being implemented, so that when we get ready to really look at this, you know, we don't discuss something that's already been implemented.
Correct. That will be part of the future process. We're going to have follow-up workshops and meetings to evaluate and make final decisions
Great.
about
Good, thank you.
what this will look like going forward, and that I'm sure will be part of it, or it will be part of it. All right.
I have a
Councilmember Scudia Brayton.
And I have more than one question, but I don't have to ask them all at once, because I'm sure while I'm speaking, someone else might think of something, so. Okay, my first question. I know that this was a very personal experience for everyone involved, and people's participation and comments were really exposed their thought process, their personal thought process. And when I mean personal, not their core beliefs, but let me just ask my question. And this is to the committee, not necessarily to the Michael or the speakers here, but I'm just curious if anyone is willing to share their opinion on if their personal opinion on policing changed significantly from when they first started with this work to now that it's complete. Because that's meaningful to me. I'm curious if anyone feels comfortable with sharing, just very briefly, if they went into this process with expectations or apprehension or some level of anxiety and just walking away with a different understanding. I'm just curious if anyone has that experience.
All right, and, okay, all right. If
There you go, we
Linda,
have some
if Linda
hands in
wants
the
to
audience.
speak, that's great. 'cause
I would
During
really
public
be-
comment period, of course, everyone is invited to do that, but feel free, Linda, to step.
Step to
Would
the
you
mic,
please speak into the microphone so that everyone can hear? Thank you.
I come from NAMI, and I have daughters with schizophrenia, so it is very personal to me. And I was very apprehensive. I've done a lot of advocacy for the seriously mentally ill, and I have seen, not just here, but all over the state and the country, some really horrible things are happening to people that we love. And so that's why I signed up for this group, but I was very nervous about it, and especially coming from my point of view, I didn't know how I was going to be received. But I have to tell you that I became very encouraged about this process and about the collaboration between the police department, the city, and the mental health department, because Ruben and the chief were communicating and developing and working on all kinds of things. They weren't waiting till the end of the report. And also the chief had such a compassionate approach, which I found very refreshing, and I hadn't experienced that in a long time. So I did walk away feeling like, yes, it is possible for us to do this. So
Thank
that
you
answer
very
your
much.
question?
Thank you.
I appreciate that. One of my other questions is in the report, in particular in the first category that was addressed, reference to funding was made more than once. Did the work group have a conversation around that? And if so, what did that sound like?
Yeah, and mostly about how that was beyond our scope, and that's your problem, not ours.
Okay, yeah,
But,
yeah,
I think.
I thought they were going to give us some money.
Yeah. What would I allow me? But I think while the work was going on, as I referenced before, I think the city has done an admirable job of going out and getting funding, right? And I think at the time of writing, it was something like there was maybe something like 3 years of runway for some of these programs. I think it's even longer than that now. So there's substantial progress being made. As you read in this, the funding, hopefully the state and/or federal government can make long-term commitments, but we hope that the city, as these programs grow and as you see the value of it in all sorts of ways, can prioritize this and make its own long-term commitments to keep. It would be such a shame and such a tragedy if these programs were built up and then had to be disassembled. That's kind of the core of what we're trying to say about funding. But as I understand it, which it's not my place, as I understand it, this is not a this year or next year type problem. It's a little further down the road, but that's just my understanding as an outsider of the city.
This question is for Will or Kate or Michael. But now that you've brought the group to conclusion and you've transitioned this work product over to us, you've identified many meaningful recommendations. What does success, what's the definition of success at this point moving forward in regards to implementation of those recommendations to you all?
Yeah, I think, I'll just start by saying in a number of conversations in the work group, in the ad hoc groups, outside of and I think this speaks to how much care and how much people brought with them into this work. The number one thing that we wanted to see was this is just a piece of paper, right? And it can just be put on a shelf, and that's the end of it. And that would be failure. So I'll answer that. That's what failure would look like. What we want to see is these ideas brought into the world. I think that I don't want to get ahead of where we are, right? And I'm sure there's going to be future conversations about how to implement this or roll this out. But I think what was I kind of addressed in my comments, the alternate response piece is growing and flourishing and really maybe ahead of what we recommended just because of how quickly things are moving, which is wonderful. The policies and practices piece is kind of our work is done, Forward Together's work is done, but that represents kind of a conversation in progress that needs to continue. And the accountability piece is kind of a vehicle for that conversation to continue and for something like Forward Together, which was this positive, trust-building, change-making process to continue. And so it kind of points to the accountability piece being implemented and kind of everything else flowing with that from that. I don't know if it addresses your question, but those are kind of my thoughts.
Just to answer your question in terms of how I perceive, I think Kate and I agree with, we have to see that police and community relations is a living organism, and it has to be fed like a living organism, and that there is no end to this. So success is for us all to have the awareness that we have a living organism that is our relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. And these three areas are only identifying areas. There's so much more that comes with this. And policies and procedures is one of those ways that we can continue to engage on a regular basis at looking at these and recognizing that policies and procedures some of them are outdated, and they need to be upgraded, they need to be articulated, perspectives from law enforcement and community need to be shared so that those policies and procedures can be practiced in a way that is living and breathing and growing and evolving with all of us. And so when we have that awareness, I think that's success.
Thank you, Michael.
So I'm not going to, I very much agree with every single thing that Will and Michael said. One, I think, thing that's still present for me is something Mike and I have said from the very beginning, which is what a shame it would be if the only thing we got at the end of this was a report. And I think that there's, we learned something as a community about how change happens and what it means for us to come together when things get hard and messy, and that something's possible, right? If we come together, and that's not our habit. That's not, you know, and when I say our, I mean the world, not you all. It's all of us. When things get hard and messy, we go to our corners and we shout at each other a lot, and sometimes we need to. But I just feel like success is that there's we've set an example, and I think the momentum needs to not go away, and I don't know what that looks like, but this work group, they showed up like in ways that really matter, and I think it's very replicable for any number of issues. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Wright, do you have another question?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, when you talked about mental health, that question I had, were you, did the police department give you stats on their calls, on how many of the calls were mental health calls compared to robberies or the other type of calls?
Yeah, and I know Chief Gillespie's here and could say more, but my understanding is they looked at quality of life calls and also calls where there was an indication from the call logs of some level of mental health crisis, and then also looked at indications of a safety concern, right? And then put in two buckets: the chat program, where there's no badge and there's no gun in the response, which is a good candidate for the calls where there was no evidence of a safety risk, and then MCERT is the other program, which I realized in my presentation I didn't spell that out, but I think you're familiar, but maybe for the public, where it's a police officer with a mental health clinician. So you have that ability to respond to the mental health piece, but also to address the safety concern.
Did the committee feel like the response from the police department on mental health calls wasn't enough? Should have been a better response, or it was mixed responses, or?
I think there was, we did not, for example, debrief in detail specific incidents and say, you should have done this, you should have done that. I think, well, one thing I want to point out, and another thing I'm glad I can go back and emphasize, is the really, what seemed to me, and I think seemed to the group, really productive partnership between Modesto PD and the Stanislaus County Behavioral Health. And I think what I observed, and we're really grateful to Ruben Imperial for serving as kind of a content expert and advisor in that ad hoc group, was just a real consensus from the department, from mental health, from the officers who respond to these calls, that it is beneficial to have a mental health clinician in certain cases, and that it is beneficial to have chat workers who are more outreach worker than law enforcement in other cases. So we didn't approach this from a, this should be better, it needs to be fixed, but I think there was a consensus from all stakeholders that this is a better way to address these kinds of calls.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One more thought or question. I wondered if each of the, I'm not sure what their titles were in each of the ad hoc focus groups. If any one of the three that were in charge of policies and practices, alternate response models. I'm so used to saying alternative response models as a nurse, so I'm having a hard time with alternate response and accountability.
I see two of the three in there.
Okay. I don't know, if they'd like to just describe their experience at all briefly or not. That's up to you. Okay. Someone, yeah.
Taking notes from some of the questions to make a comment at the very end, and maybe I still will if some questions come up.
Sure, yeah,
I feel
just
like
if you talk maybe about the experience with
add
the group,
things
because
to-
the public, this will be totally open to the public for everyone to make any comment that they would like to. So feel free to talk about your experience maybe with your ad hoc group.
Sure. So I was the chair of the of the accountability ad hoc group. I know that yeah, I mean, right away, if you're talking about accountability, you're almost like a connotation that somebody needs to be held accountable. So I understand it can be touchy. I know that I personally try to keep an open mind as much as possible, and I think I did, and I think everybody did, and I was very impressed by that, the way everybody listened to each other's perspectives and had that basic understanding that, you know, you've had your life and experiences, and you've had your life and experiences, and just because we haven't experienced the same thing doesn't mean we're wrong. And so people with different experiences shared those, and I think there was common understanding. I think that was one of the reasons why we were able to agree on so many recommendations. I don't want to go into some of the like comments I want to make about specific questions, but if you have a question specifically about, you know, the interactions in the committee, I can
That's
expound
okay.
on
This
that,
is
but-
okay. That's good. I just kind of wanted to feel for someone that was in each of the committees, what that was like. So thank you very much.
Sure,
And you'll
yeah,
have another
positive
opportunity.
experience, I can definitely
Okay,
say.
all right. Anyone from policies and practices or alternate response models? Okay.
And I'll just, while Dan's walking up, so Leah Ashford was the chair of alternate response, and I don't believe she's with us tonight, but, yeah, unable to come
Okay.
tonight, but did an excellent job as chair of
Okay,
that.
great. Thank you. Welcome.
Mayor, council, I wasn't planning on speaking tonight. I was lucky enough to chair the Policy and Practices Ad Hoc Committee. So out of this ad hoc committee, as Will kind of spoke about, there were varying viewpoints based upon life experiences and things that they have seen and heard throughout their lives. So this created, at times, some differences in opinion. Tom also sat on it with me, and kind of interesting, Tom, if you don't know, he represents the ACLU. I represent the police officers, and there was more than once that in several of these ad hoc groups that we agreed on topics, which I share that because that shows that everyone was trying. Everyone was trying to see the other's viewpoint. Everyone was trying to come to consensus and to come to a understanding of where they may be from or where they may, things that they may have experienced in their life. And so that helped as we progressed through the different meetings that we had. I think that although there were 8 topics out of the policy and practices, I think out of the 8 topics came a total of 28 recommendations, if I remember correctly. I was lucky enough to sit on all 3 of the ad hoc committees, and unfortunately, this is one of the ad hoc committees where we weren't able to come to a consensus on all the items. As Will has alluded to, policy making is difficult, and there are many different viewpoints and a tremendous amount of education that needs to go into policy making and understanding current policy. So it was a good discussion. We weren't able to come into an agreement on all of the items, but some of the items we were able to. So I think I'll leave it at that, but I'll close with everyone in the ad hoc had very strong opinions about many of the topics, and everyone had an open mind and was willing to discuss it, the various topics, even though at times we weren't able to come to a group agreement on various topics.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And for alternate response models, I think we heard from Linda, or would you like to speak again regarding that?
Sure, yeah. I don't see
Leah
Leah in the
couldn't be
room.
here.
Yeah, I don't think she-
Yeah, they said Leah could not be here, so.
That was the only committee I served on. I would have loved to have been all of them, but time didn't permit. But anyway, I was very proud of this group of people, and like Will said, we did come fairly quickly to a real consensus about where we were going with this and what we wanted to achieve. There's a couple of things that from my own stakeholder groups that I represent that I would like to mention that they especially felt is very, very important, and is having a 24/7 mental health crisis services. Because not everybody has a mental health crisis Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. So that was one of the things that the people that talked to me it's very important. And the other thing that I wanted to share, because as an advocate, when I was advocating for Laura's Law here in Stanislaus County, I always kept hitting my head over data sharing, confidentiality, those kinds of things. And as a member of NAMI, I went to several conferences where they had workshops, and there were teams of law enforcement and mental health workers that gave presentations about going out on calls together, and they were having data come up on their little screens as they were driving down the road and knowing exactly what to expect, who the worker was, and how to get help. And I said, how can this be in LA? And yet everywhere, I talk to anyone, they say, oh, no, you can't do that. So they did a little investigation and found out that when police and mental health workers are responding together on a call, you can share data in respect to what you are doing at that moment in time. So you can share the data so that you have the information that you need to respond to the call in a meaningful way and hopefully healthy way. So anything more you want to add?
No, I think positive experience. It was
It
great.
was.
Great,
Yes.
thank you very much. That's helpful.
Thank you,
Any
thank
other
you.
questions
Yeah.
from council members?
I do have a question,
Okay.
unless someone
Councilmember
else does.
Scooty Brayton.
The three respective groups, there was consensus of the particular recommendation, it got moved forward. There wasn't consensus on the particular recommendation, what happened to that, to those?
Yeah, so, all right, I don't want to split hairs or get too in the weeds, but I'll try and be as clear as I can. So with alternate response and accountability, maybe I'll start here. Everything in this document was voted on and approved by the full work group. So each ad hoc group had its own discussion and consensus building process and writing process. It was compiled into this document. It was reviewed by the full work group and approved. So this is, our recommendations as the Forward Together work group. I think the thing that can cause some confusion but was important to best reflect kind of what happened in policies and practices. I think maybe there was a sense in the beginning that we might come in with very specific, change this language in this policy, delete this policy, add this policy here. And there was kind of a process of learning, and I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I think us learning as a group that wasn't going to be our finished product there. So it kind of morphed into, here are some ideas that should be looked at in the future, especially as the accountability group was starting to develop a structure for having those conversations. And as Dan said, we would sometimes spend an hour discussing one idea and not reach consensus, right? So we reached a compromise of sorts where we provided a list kind of all the ideas that at least one member of the group felt strongly about and wanted to be included, and as kind of a menu of topics to be considered in the future. I know that's caused some confusion, right? And there's some things in there that, like Dan said, are divisive or that just people didn't agree on. I think it's worded carefully to try and say this is just a list of things that at least one person thought was, and the real recommendation is to continue the conversation in the accountability structure. So it was a long-winded, complicated answer to a simple question. Yeah.
Individually, maybe there wasn't consensus of that particular
So
item,
I want to,
but collectively as a group,
yeah.
there was consensus that these were the body of recommendations to be moved forward.
That's right. And I think if you look carefully at the language in in that list, Dan was talking about 28 items. Some of them are things like, consider reviewing this policy, right? So I just want to kind of emphasize because sometimes those first words get left out and people think this means do this thing immediately without any thought or delay. I think this was more the flavor of, this is something that was important to someone in the group and that probably needs some further discussion in the future.
Can I just add something from a process perspective too? So, and I just want to declare it was Michael Baldwin who supported the ad hoc groups, so I wasn't in these conversations. But when you asked the question, if there was consensus, we moved it forward. If there wasn't consensus, what happened? So what Will is saying is that really in the areas of alternate responses and accountability, there's consensus. And it happened fairly quickly. And it was in the policies and practices work group and in the work group at large where when there was an alignment on a particular suggestion or something that came from a person, we would use in the large work group, we'd give people the opportunity to say, I like all of this, but this one thing I'm not okay with, right? And then if there wasn't consensus, we would work that very particular point together. And that what Will is pointing out is that the voting on these recommendations as being the final product, like consensus was the group agreeing that even though they didn't agree on all those policy potential recommendations, they'd all get into the report because we wanted you to continue wanted you to continue to pay attention to them through the accountability process.
right. Any further questions from council members? Seeing none in person and online, now is the opportunity for the public to come forward to speak on this item. I have one blue card for in person, and that is James Costello. Welcome.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the Forward Working Group. They did a tremendous job. I've read the report. It is really good, and I think you will find it extremely detailed, cover to cover. I would also encourage you to read the Anaheim documents too. Go to their website. There's a link in the report. Read those documents because this is a thing that works. This is the trend. It's imperative that communities develop trust between law enforcement and members of the community, especially people of color. Now, I am a member of a committee. We examined the City of Davis, members of ACLU, NAACP, other Modesto Peace Life Center, of which I'm a member. We looked at just police accountability. And the City of Davis has a model similar to Anaheim's. And they have an IPA, they have a review committee, and so I'm really pleased that they honed in on Anaheim because they seem to be doing the right thing if you read their reports. One of the things that we came up in our research, I have 5 members of law enforcement in my family, 2 immediate. It's very difficult to talk about this because they're gun shy. They think people are out to get them because they're good officers, and most are, but they're catching flack from other people who have this horrible negative association with the police because of what has happened. This is not an effort to derail or demean the police or to go after them. And our effort wasn't that, and that's not what this is either. This is an effort to bring people together. And so I don't think the city can afford not to do this. This is the way that you can build trust between police and the community. And as far as cost, one more thing, cost. The city of Modesto has been, over the years, have been sued for millions and millions of dollars due to police activities. An independent auditor can investigate, and if the police turns out, an incident occurs and it turns out it was a good shoot or whatever the incident was, that IPA can assert that and issue a public report saying whatever happened was okay. On the other hand, if something happens is not okay, that IPA will make recommendations about policy change or behavioral change or procedural change. So that will be public too. It's imperative that transparency, as Will emphasized, be part of this. The public has to be part of this. And lastly, when the committee is chosen by whatever mechanism you decide, I think these committee members really have to be committed. And one of my law enforcement relatives said, they have to really understand what police do. They just can't jump on a committee and make some assumptions. They have to do ride-alongs, and his suggestion was they do forcive training. Every member of the committee should go through forcive training, the same training that police do, if they can. And I agree with that. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Online, I see Tim Ragsdale.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Tim Ragsdale here, longtime Modesto resident. I too have a great deal of appreciation for all the work that's gone into this study and report. And I really appreciate the counsel of Michael Baldwin. I know him personally, and I have a great deal of respect for him. The stated goal of the Forward Together is to build community trust. But I think community trust is a two-way street, and this report and study appears to lack any reference to the essential element of citizen compliance with the law. The report recommends sponsoring a community, quote, know your rights training for citizens, but there's no mention of knowing your responsibilities with regard to the law training. Just on a side note, I'm a little confused by a statement in the executive summary that takes what could be interpreted as an elitist tone when it refers to considering information from, quote, relevant stakeholders, which, again, I'm confused by, it sounds like it's qualifying stakeholders as relevant and irrelevant. Lastly, I just want to say that, you know, building community trust has got to require all of us to respect the law and each other as well, whether we're wearing a uniform or not. And I really appreciate the concept that this is going to be a continuing effort. And I just hope that it includes all aspects of community public safety and relations with the police, not just, you know, some cherry-picked issues that could be just interpreted as just a favorable to apolitical perspective. And I really appreciate the previous speaker mentioning the knowledge, the ride-alongs, and how this is not an effort to just pick on the police. That could be interpreted based on the topics that were chosen in this report. Anyway, great job, and thank you for the opportunity, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Same to you. Next is Ramon Rodriguez.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Well, honestly, like, if we had forward together years before all this, the recent incidents involving the shooting of Dylan Harvey and the death of Paul Chavez would have never occurred, as well as Trevor Seaver and other victims. So now, how are we going to build trust again because of the recent incidents? And also, you might consider learning other methods of policing in other countries such as Singapore, because from what I've learned about Singapore police force is that they have really extreme, strict regulations on use of force. And I've read the news articles about how Singapore police force handled the situations that requires use of force, and almost all the time they did not require use of a gun, except in one case where a man had a knife and he was threatening people as well, and they used every method until they had to use a gun, and unfortunately he died. But my point is, you need to learn, I'm not sure if it's added, but you need to learn other methods of policing, such as in Norway, Singapore, and most of Europe, where they don't use force in situations. And that's what happened in Paul Chavez's case. The officer involved, he didn't respond in a personal manner. He just had his gun ready, and this is really hard and distressing, but for me, that video reminded me of La Matilla, because the similarities between the Chavez and Seaver cases, the officers had their guns ready, they never identified themselves personally, and they used force without using the alternative methods of de-escalating the situation. And that is why I know certain officers are really good, but the real cause of the issue is the police culture, not just in Modesto, but it's happening in America, is that we use too much violence. And the only way to make people feel like safe is that we stop using too much force. Because if we keep using too much excessive force, many people are going to be injured or unfortunately dead. And that's why I don't want to see Modesto or any other community going down that route. So I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next is Darlene Ruiz.
Good evening, City Council and the Forward Together Committee. I just wanted to come on here and give my appreciation to Michael Baldwin and Kate and Will I think that the Forward Together Committee has done a tremendous job on trying to bring some police reform to our city. This is what I've been praying for. In light of losing Trevor, I wanted to help make some positive change in our community. I think it's vital that all recommendations that Forward Together are implemented and not just some. I believe if we do not have an independent police auditor, we will never get to the root of the problem. In light of what's happened with other shootings, it's obviously not one bad apple, but other people, not just La Matia, that are using excessive force and not de-escalation tactics. As far as respecting the law, a guy called on there that said respecting the law. Not all shootings from police is from a victim that wasn't respecting the law. So I don't agree with that. Until we recognize that we want to make our Modesto Police Department better and bring trust to the community, we need to acknowledge there's a problem. I want to thank Forward Together for all your work. I think the report is wonderful, and I pray that you, City Council, will implement everything and do it quickly. I feel terrible that somebody else has lost their life and these haven't been implemented yet. So I pray that we all continue to work together and make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else from the public that would like to make a comment at this time? Step forward. Okay, and next, Solange had her hand.
It's a microphone, I have to come up here. No, I just wanted to express the gratitude to all the folks who were on the committee, because I came into this and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I've done a lot of hard things. It's very stressful because I thought we were going to end up in a spot that wasn't going to be where we needed to be. If you look at these recommendations, I changed a lot of what I thought things should be based on listening to other people, building relationships, and I think that's what, it's already been said, but relationships are the only way this is going to work. If we're throwing rocks at each other, it's not going to work. It's only through that the willing to make change. And I commend the police department, Dan from the police union and Brandon as police chief. They're already doing a lot of the things that we're talking about here, and we need to continue. But for us to believe that nothing is going to ever happen bad again is not true, because we're dealing with people, and people do stupid stuff no matter what side that you are on this. But I was just amazed at how, when I listened to what the other people had to say, instead of interjecting or over casting my opinion on what it ought to be, I was able to see things from a much broader perspective. And I think that's what you got here is a report you had a lot of divergent ideas when we walked in that room, and we came, and there was some arm wrestling going on at certain points, but we ended up in the same spot, all willing to say that this is what we want. And I'll say it again, I think that you really need to continue the work that's been already happening. And so I just am very proud to be from Modesto right now.
Thank you. All right. Welcome.
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, Solange Gonzalez-Altman. I served on the committee, and I just want to say Will did a tremendous job, and he hasn't been given enough credit, and kudos to him for everything that he did. So he really did a good job. And everyone so Councilwoman Escutia brought up at the beginning, she was curious about how did you change and what expectations did you have. So many of you may know I was an immigration attorney, and so I represented immigrants who had 2 experiences with the police. Either they were battered women and they loved the police because they helped them get through really difficult situations, and then I also had clients who were stopped and asked about their immigration status, and it was really intimidating. So I came into this thinking that the police would be very closed and unwilling and not open to change. And I expected them to have that sort of like, we're right, you're wrong kind of culture. Well, I was completely mistaken about that. You have an amazing police chief who is data-driven and who is also very committed to making sure that his police officers are as well trained as they possibly can be. And I think that attitude of making sure that they have all the training that they need, it changes the culture. For a city the size of Modesto, I mean, we're really fortunate to have officers who are so professional. And the other thing I learned is the work that they do. I always knew it was difficult, but I have a new appreciation of exactly how difficult their work is. I did a ride-along, and I was horrible, as the mayor can attest, when we went through that scenario training. Yes, she would have been killed. I was killed, Anyway, but all things, I could never do this work. It isn't just about the education, the training, and the experience, and going through all these scenarios that the chief is having people go through. It's also about teaching officers to have good judgment and to exercise that judgment instantaneously in all these different situations. And the situations are always different. And teaching someone to have that judgment, I think, is just a very difficult thing, and they do a really good job at trying to teach that. So that's how it opened my mind. Now, I want to address a couple of things. You asked, where do we go from here? How can we measure whether what we're doing, whether we're successful or not? Where do we go from here? Money. Money is critical, and people didn't want to talk about it, and I kept bringing it up. Can I keep going, please?
Sure.
Anyway, this tax increase that you have on the ballot, I think it's important for citizens to understand that if you want a better police force, if you want people to be skilled and trained and to have what they need, if you want mental health clinicians to ride along with officers, we need the funding to pay for those staff and to enable the training to happen. So I strongly urge citizens to support this tax measure when it comes up on the ballot. And then beyond that, we also need the funding for an independent auditor, and I wanted to talk about this police review board. So the independent auditor will be looking at critical incidents that happen, and if, as Jim Costello pointed out, those reports are done in such a way that they reveal where the lapses are in policy, then you need to ensure that the policy changes happen. And those policy changes will be difficult because some of them will involve renegotiating contracts, and that's why we couldn't really get into a lot of detail on that. Also, I wanted to bring up the police review board. We didn't outline who should be on the board and how many people should be on there. You need some professional people on there. You need some people who have police experience, and I think having some people on there who maybe have a law degree and some experience of dealing with the agencies and knowing how things work administratively and how the law works would be helpful. And no, I'm not volunteering to be on the committee. How can you measure your success in the long run? Accountability, in the accountability portion, I think there was a mention about this. You have to look at the number of lawsuits that are brought each year and what you've been paying out on these claims. Modesto, compared to other cities, has paid out very little, but there have been lawsuits, and it's something to be concerned with. And also the number of complaints that are brought and how those are addressed. If you have a police review board made of community members, they may start to see themes, and they can address those themes so that the complaints will diminish, and so the policies and procedures that need to be changed will be changed. So anyway, those are just some things I wanted to sort of highlight. Anyway, it was a very eye-opening experience. I ended up being secretary for the 3 different subcommittees and took a lot of minutes and notes. So I learned a lot, and I just hope, as Will said, this report doesn't get shelved. I hope that the recommendations are implemented and that the funding comes through to be able to implement what we have proposed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now I'll take Steve online and then Trish. So we have Steve online.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool, I see that I'm already down to 2 minutes and 54 seconds, so I guess I better hurry up. I just wanted to echo what Solange was saying about the absolute necessity to actually fund the programs that might make a difference. It's huge, obviously. Related to that, which really has a lot to do also with, which informs my my grave concerns, is just that, you know, through this entire process, you guys have had the police department and other people who are already in positions of power controlling the entire process. Not controlling every aspect of it, but throughout the entire process, I should say. We need people with knowledge and expertise, but that can't be an excuse to exclude people from the community that are the ones that have the most to lose and the most to gain. I hear a lot of deceitful language, people saying things as Darlene pointed out earlier, you know, people making comments that are basically saying things like, you know, they're beating around the bush, but they're saying that Paul Chavez should have been perfect and the cops wouldn't kill him. They're saying that Trevor Seaver shouldn't have had a bad day. He shouldn't have been there with no witnesses to stop Lamontia from murdering him because he wanted to. I mean, there's implications. Your words are betraying your ideology, no matter how much you want to talk about other people not being open and not seeing both sides and all of that. I just really want to make sure that we all remember what has brought us here today. And it is an absolute, undeniable fact, a reality of history and of this current time, that the police have failed us over and over and over again. And most people in this community aren't aware of how long that's been the case and how many different examples of that there are. There wouldn't be a Forward Together commission if there wasn't a problem. So I just really want to see, you know, the auditor and the review board and all of that actually, you know, have some teeth and not be a puppet of the police. You guys, you know, chose professionals that had law enforcement backgrounds, and, you know, fine, they have knowledge of, you know, the ins and outs of executing all that stuff, but nevertheless, I see it as a huge problem. The more that you keep control in the hands of the people and the associated groups of people that have already had the power. We are here where we are today because law enforcement has failed us. We are here where we are today because law enforcement has already failed us over and over and over again. We wouldn't be here just making a big stink. People don't just hate police because there's something wrong with them because they're libtards. That whole rhetoric is silly, and I'm still, to this day, hearing an awful lot of it. We would not be where we are right now if it were not for the fact that the police have failed this community. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next, Trish. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Council. So I'm Trish Christensen. I was on the committee. I sat on the alternate response subcommittee. I think it's important for people to, and I'm glad Solange brought up the ride-along and the opportunities to experience the other side. That was part of my focus in speaking. But I also want to comment on people walk the walk and take in the perspective from where they're standing in it in the moment. The things we hear about are the things that hurt and the things that are hard and the loss of life. The police department as a whole is impressive when you spend time out in the street with them. And I think they need credit and acknowledgement for that. My ride-along, when I did it, I chose to do the full 12 hours. I did it on Saturday night of Memorial Day weekend. We were not bored. I can't tell you, I think we were near 30-plus calls before we were done. I went along the process of taking someone and having them processed into the jail system. We didn't repeat any calls except one. We went back to one house twice for domestic violence. We had 2 different stories on that in that night. It was eye-opening for me, and that's part of what I wanted to bring into this conversation is, as Michael mentioned, this is about finding the space in the middle where we learn to understand one another, the community side and the law enforcement side. There has to be sympathy and understanding and transparency. The amount of transparency the department volunteered into this effort was amazing. It blew my mind to see how big and deep that policy and procedure manual can be. The presentations that they gave us were very detailed, very open. They didn't shy away from any of the questions presented to them. The opportunity for us to go into a controlled simulation environment, live and in, I always want to say video, the virtual world. That alone was eye-opening. That's what we did first. I don't think every committee member went through it. I think a majority of it did. I talked with a few. Changed the mindset for each person that did it at some point, a great deal for some of us. Doing the ride-along, it really stuck with me. It's something I talked through with my family several times. Our officers are out there. They're out there for long hours. The amount of people that stop and wave and say, thank you, we appreciate you, I would say 1 out of every 10. The amount of people that stop and slurs and words and insults thrown at them, probably 6 out of 10. They're humans just like everyone else, and they're having to take this in and shield it and make snap moment decisions in the good and the bad. Watching how much effort they put into respect and dignity in dealing with the people in the experiences I witnessed was amazing. Even that takes extra time and effort in the moment, and they all executed that. So I just want to give acknowledgement that this was an amazing process to go through. The committee member, that each of us learned something. Each of us took something away. It'll be bigger for some than others in different ways, but the value in learning that there's understanding that we don't see, the community does not see what their books look like and what their policies look like and the energy they put into this. Until you try it on, you really don't know what they go through. Their need to step back and consider from the community side, I'll just say they are trying very hard on that every day.
Thank you. Next online, we have Emerson Drake.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A couple things that I haven't heard addressed. I think we need better psychological screening in our hiring. Obviously, some radicalized officers have gotten through. Obviously, we still have some on the force, and I'd like to see, and I see no way to address that problem. But the big one that scared me is when someone said, what are we going to see, what does success look like? Well, I thought it was pretty simple. Fewer needless deaths. To me, that would be the goal. That's what hopefully everybody's there for. Everybody's trying to accomplish, but it's not spoken. We need to have a way to deal with some of the officers that are already employed by us that seem to have issues. When Joseph Lamantia, more recently, a man facing away, holding a ball hitch at his side, gets shot twice while they're still screaming at him. I'll stop. The video's there. We barely touched the issues that we have facing us right now. It's going to behoove the council to push forward and not let them be trimmed, like the one caller just said. You know, make these ideas not euphemisms. Make them something real. Make them something solid. Let's make sure, while we need some professionals there, let's make sure that we don't involve former councilmen or especially those that might have been police officers. There's too many issues around to have old habits, whatever you want to call them, muddy the water. We don't need that. We need a new, clean approach. And I hope the council has the wherewithal to do what it takes and not be shunted to the side, not to gloss over items, but to make the hard decisions. I thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on this item? All right, did you have a comment, Rodrigo?
Yeah, if you allow me to.
Sure, for sure. Yes. And then Tom, I saw your hand.
I've been present at this proceeding since the beginning as an interpreter, and also I have translated most of these documents, so I learned a lot. And allow me to tell you that this is great. One of the things I started by saying very cynically that this was not to work. Why? Because I have been in the news business for a long time. I was a reporter and a columnist at the Stockton Record for a long time. And I didn't see I didn't see much of an expectation on this. It's always as us and them, and it is difficult for police to be out there and knowing, you can call it Second Amendment or whatever you want, but there are just too many guns out there. So they have all the right to be afraid of anyone because they don't know what they have underneath. So I do agree with the police being kind of paranoid. I also understand why my group, I am an immigrant, I'm from Chile, and in Chile we have a police force that is absolutely qualified as second in America after Canada. You cannot bribe a policeman in Chile, you get arrested. So we have a very particular relationship with police, which we don't have here. I've been covering protests and things and where the after police are common ground. Every time that there's a shooting, everybody damn the police, they don't want it to exist. So I have a very particular and out of the box experience with all this. But anyway, and the other thing is, people keep on building the past. I did this, they did this, and they did that, and they don't keep, they lose the perspective that meant that we have to start where we are. We cannot go to the past and try to fix it. We cannot, redo or replace all the problems that we did in the past, slavery, conquest, whatever you want. We have to start where we are. And what we're doing now, not we, but you guys are doing, it's a start, and you have to give it a chance. So that's what I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. All right, Tom.
Okay, I'll try to keep this to 3 minutes, maybe 3.5. But I wanted to specifically address some of the comments, if I can add anything. So I'm just going to kind of take them one by one. There was a question about the Latino youth's arrests. I can say that I was the one who kind of flagged that. That was directly from the presentation that we got from the police department, maybe in our first or second meeting. And I saw that the arrest for adults was pretty much reflective of the ethnic makeup of Modesto. But when it came to youth, it was, maybe like a double-digit, percentage difference. So that just raised the flag there. And then after that, I noticed two other things. One, when the survey about choosing the police chief went out, only 15% of Latinos participated in that survey. Much, much lower than they're reflected in the population. The other thing I noticed was in the applications to become police officers, it was like a reverse statistic of the population, the Latino population of who applies to be. So that was just kind of shouting out at me, there needs to be some kind of special outreach done to the Latino community, to maybe some more building of trust needs to happen there. And so I just wanted to point that out. The mental health issue, it can't be overstated how important that is. And I've heard the sentiments. I remember at a past city council meeting, somebody did mention the point, if they would have just complied. And if you haven't been around somebody that's going through a mental health crisis, consider yourself lucky. If you haven't seen somebody that you've known your whole life or known for years completely not act like themselves, that's what the police and the community is dealing with a lot of the times. Is And we have to start really thinking about, you know, what a person is going through when they're having a mental health crisis, and the training and the knowledge that needs to be available to deal with situations like that. And I know it wasn't our police department, but I've brought up several times the video of Eloy Gonzalez, who was shot by the sheriff's department. And because I think it's an example to look at where there was a lot of effort done by the sheriff's department to talk to that person and to not just have confrontation. But in the end, even if you're being polite and you're trying to talk to somebody, if they are not in a certain frame of mind, it is not going to matter. And so there has to just be more done. And even though those efforts were done, the fact is that he was still shot and killed within 8 minutes of that whole incident happening. So I just want to mention that. I knew I was going to go over. And the point about some of the policies and procedures, you know, not coming to agreement, that is why, you know, we there's, you know, that book of policies and procedures is very thick. We had tons of questions. We spent, you know, sometimes a whole meeting almost just talking about one subject, and that's when we kind of came to the realization that we could really do deep dives into all of these issues and maybe still not even agree, but more time needed to be spent on those. Like Brad said, I'll admit when I came into it, I thought this was going to kind of be a verbal fight. And I expected to come in and say, look, I'm going to share all these experiences that I've had and that I've community members I've worked with, and I'm going to really have to, you know, fight for this. And that just wasn't the case, to be completely honest. Like I said already before, everybody was very open-minded and understanding of other people's points of view. So that was my biggest surprise. And to kind of answer the question of how your opinion changed, I very much saw the more openness and willingness to listen and to look at change. I've already said in past Forward Together meetings, I thought the chief has gone beyond what he, you know, was needed in going after these programs and setting up these alternatives. I just think that that's really great, and I look forward to seeing it grow. And then just the last thing, you know, to answer the question, what is success? Yes, like the gentleman said, obviously we want less shooting incidences, less, you know, incidents where violence is involved. And the one thing that I tried to say in a lot of meetings was building that trust. So yes, it is about the specific incidents, but I think that comes from building that trust. And I would always say, or at least I said it a few times, you know, think of convincing me as being kind of skeptical in the process, and then folks that are out there that I know are even more skeptical than me. I know because I've worked with them and I've talked to them, and I was always just trying to keep in mind, what is it going to take to convince them? I'm not talking about the folks who will never be convinced, but folks that can be convinced. What is it going to take? And I think that the recommendations reflect that. I'm sorry for going over, but I wanted to try to cover all that.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Sure, Linda? Speak right into the microphone.
Someone brought up the cost, and what I want to talk about is the cost of not implementing. And obviously, the loss of life is the primary cost of not implementing these things. And the lawsuits, that's a cost of not implementing. But also, if you, I don't know all the workings that go on in the city, but I do hear reports about the money you have to spend on sweeps and on cleanups and on road work, and, you know, because there's homeless and mentally ill people roaming around with, you know, nowhere to go and nothing to do. Those costs also could decrease by having the appropriate responses and getting the appropriate help. So I'd like you to take that into consideration as well when you're looking at the cost. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, welcome.
I am here, my name is Tina Driscoll, and I'm here because I know that I'm going to be working with some kinds of, with a group that will be looking at police. But what I'm feeling is that looking at the police is like looking at this far up from the bottom of the basis of what is going on. I do believe we're in a society that ignores things like, I haven't heard much about substance abuse, and when these people are using substance abuse, I mean, we've heard, some of you may have heard, I'm sure, the term meth desto. When somebody is on meth, they are extremely out of control, angry, and cannot function. So substance abuse is unbelievable. If we haven't talked about early childhood intervention, where perhaps these children don't grow up to be in a position where they cannot control themselves and are homeless. We haven't talked about how people address homelessness. One of the people I know who was homeless and just had a poster person picture of her story of a homeless person, how people walk past them, they don't. You know, I've been guilty of walking past and turning the other direction. We do not know as a society how to treat each other as humans. And if you look at, especially in Europe, the idea of justice, there was a PBS special about the highest security prison in Germany. It's set on a beach. Each person has their own apartment. They have knives, forks, spoons, TVs, beds. They're comfortable. They're treated like human beings when they're, and I'm talking about people who are murderers and rapists, and you know, the worst kinds. And when their families come to visit them, they go out on the beach and take a walk with them. There's a whole different rapport. And I also knew people who worked in the prisons in Sweden. And, you know, they're just treated differently. Here in the United States, when we talk justice, I think we're equating it with revenge. Whereas there, they're trying to rehabilitate. Thank you.
You're welcome. Right, welcome.
I just want to say, first, I'm Mike Baldwin, and I'm grateful for having an opportunity to be one of the co-facilitators with Kate to help navigate this process and just help to hold a container that allowed all of these phenomenal people to come in and have some tough discussions. I'm humbled by the process, but I also want, you know, I think that our community, because they're not in the room, sometimes don't really understand who was all in the room. And the fact that I was one of the individuals to facilitate, I spent 26 years in prison. I never imagined myself being in relationship with police in a positive way. And to be in a part of a process that allows for community and police to find some healthy ways of engaging one another, is definitely not a process that the police was in control of. This is definitely not a process that anybody was dictating. You hired Kate, and Kate asked me to participate with her, and we did our best to create a safe environment, and we had to do some coaching, and we had to do some bridge building, and then Will became the chair, and he done a phenomenal job at gaining consensus, which took outside conversation sometimes, which took, you know, letting someone feel validated and heard. And we have in our city, I think, one of the greatest opportunities to be a beacon for the rest of our nation. And that doesn't mean that everything's going to work out fine and everything's going to be okay. but it means that when things aren't okay, we can still come to the table and have conversations. And no one had to sacrifice their identity in order for them to be in the room and to have conversation. No one had to sacrifice even their position. What happened was they understood their perspective grew. And, you know, I think that even our law enforcement, see, we haven't talked a lot about how our law enforcement has shifted their thinking and sought to understand the community more. We have learned to understand law enforcement, but I've watched law enforcement reach across and come to understand the community more, that they have educated themselves and reignited their empathy for the community that they serve. And I think that with the leadership of Brandon Gillespie, it has put us in a position as a community to be an example for the rest of the nation to follow on how we do policing and how we do community building and how community respond to police, right? So that there's not this adversarial relationship, but this shared experience that we're all trying to experience life together. And so I'm humbled by my participation as a facilitator of Forward Together, and I appreciate you, Mayor, for really igniting this process, and for the rest of the council to implement this. And now we really have to put our money where our mouth is, and potential is great, but the graveyard and prisons are filled with a lot of potential. We have to take our potential and put it into action, and I think implementing these recommendations and really calling on the community to help finance these, we as a body continue to push the financial cost, that part away from the conversation, because it would have distracted us from being able to gain the consensus. We would have taken on a responsibility that we really had no power in. And so now the power is on you, and I really appreciate each one of you for the courage I know it's going to take for you to bend some of your edges and really get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Yes, sir, come forward.
Good evening. I'm Ken Schroeder, and I really appreciate all of the work and effort that went into preparing this report. And I want to strongly urge the council to adopt the recommendations that were made. It would be helpful to understand what will be the process after today for the council to consider and make decisions about it, and what will be the timing of that. I think it would be helpful to understand that. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. I plan to address that when we're concluding. Welcome.
Hello. My name is Nikos Lorio. I was a part of the committee. Just want to give you a little bit of background of myself. Grew up with a stepfather who was a police officer in the city of Oakland, and also have family members that are in law enforcement as well. I myself was thinking about going down that path. But here we are today, and I just wanted to say thank you to Kate and Michael, because they, trusted me as a community member to be a part of this process, and Brandon Gillespie as well. I mean, we're pretty good friends now. People may know me as someone that's in the beginning kind of anti-police. I'm just gonna say that. I really kind of was out there and the protest and doing all those kind of things. And when it came down to hearing about this committee, I felt like I needed to do more for the community, and so I actually felt like instead of being out in the streets and kind of just yelling and being angry at policing for just what's going on in the community and in the world, I decided to challenge myself and to step into this role and really be a part of it, and I'm really thankful for this. And I know now that after going through all the simulators and some of the training that the police go through, it is a difficult job to have, and I did find a newfound respect for police officers. I just wanted to, maybe ask that the police department be able to kind of come out with another program to show or to allow the community members to come in and actually do some of the exercises that we did as a committee. It does give you a new perspective of the police officers and their job and the hard work that they put into. I was very adamant about a bunch of the policies, wanting to get them changed and stuff like that. But I think after all of this and being through a lot of this, I feel the mental health is something that should be really focused on for police officers. They go through a lot, they see a lot as they're out there on the streets, and it's very hard to go home to your families, to your loved ones, and not let your job affect you and how you are in your household. Mental health is something that we should all take seriously, and I just feel that having more available mental health access for police officers is something that we should focus on, so that we can have the best policing that we can have out there, and so that they can go home and be able to really enjoy their families and loved ones. So I just thank you guys for, you know, allowing this committee to form and allowing us to give you all of the recommendations. So thank you guys.
You're welcome. Was there someone else that wanted to speak?
I want to say one more thing.
Okay, sure.
There was something I forgot to say. Being an immigrant, it was interesting also because of, I came from a completely different background than Mexicans. And I lived in Mexico for 3 years after that. And I understand a lot about the Mexican idiosyncrasy. And one of the things is they don't trust the police. So they come to this country and they expect the same interaction. So that's another thing that is very worrisome. This brings that the people, when police show up, they hide out and they do not cooperate. I mean, there's a lot of things, in addition to the language, of course. You see that people here in the Central Valley are very prone to hear fireworks. People that have no respect for anybody else's piece of sleep or anything. They do a lot of things that we don't like because it is not so-called the American way. Therefore, there's a lot of fight between the way of thinking of immigrants and the police, and I believe that this is not going to be a problem that will be solved with any going forward or faster forward, whatever the name is, because you have a fresh crop of Mexicans coming every year, and you have to educate them. If you don't do that, you're going to have a problem with the immigrants forever because, you know, I am not saying immigration is good or bad. What I'm saying is it's going to be an ongoing problem because that's reality. So you have to factor that in. You have to educate people who come to this country to know what to expect and how things like, for example, laws are to be respected, ordinances to be respected, otherwise there's going to be problems. And a lot of these problems are because people do not know what their rights are, or like someone else said here, what their obligations are. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on this item? All right, at this point, I will close the public comments, and I will ask council for further comments. Are there any members of the council that would like to make a comment?
I would.
Vice Mayor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. So my takeaway tonight, number one, building trust. I think that's very, very important. Listening to our committee, or to our citizens, and also to our law enforcement, and also talking to our community. I think something, hopefully the chief really picked up on, getting his officers out to the community and really sharing on both sides what officers go through, and also listen to the community members and see what they go through. Educating is part of that process. I think that's very important to educate everyone. I like what the gentleman just said about people coming to this country from another country, educating them on their rights and how our officers respond and why they respond. I think that's very important. And then also understanding. I think what you all shared with us today is that each one of you came in with a different perspective, and then when you started talking and realizing you really understood what the other perspectives were. And I think every citizen in Modesto should go through what you guys went through to really understand on both sides. And I really appreciate our police department really stepping up, and our officers, you know, Sergeant Starr and his group, to really reach out, and instead of having their opinions, and it sounded like to me that they were there to learn also. And I think that's very, very important when we have officers that really want to learn, want to be part of this community. A lot of our officers live in this community. They go home every night to this community. And knowing that they're going home with a lot of times a lot of feelings of disparity for what they've ran into that night. I know when I did a ride along a couple years ago, one of our stops where a family members had a teenage daughter that was out of control. And you know, my heart went out to that family, because we had to take that daughter into the mental health department there at Doctor's Hospital because she was just out of control. And I know that was heartbreaking for the parents, but the parents didn't know what else to do. And those officers have to go home every night and think about that. So I think understanding that and then working together as a community to better understand each other is the process that we need to do in order to be a greater community. I just want to thank each one of you that served on this community, on this committee. I think you guys did a great job. And I've gone through the draft of the report. I'm hopefully, I want to go through the actual report now, and I'm looking forward to moving forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Knoyer.
Yes, I just wanted to comment. I kind of came in a little late, but got the majority of the report. The thing I think that impresses me most from when I listened to the people who, well, I want to thank everyone that took time. This was a long process for you. I admire the fact that you all took that much time out of your lives to try to work toward a something that the community would accept. And I think the thing that kind of impressed me is that how many, their minds changed. I'm not just saying toward the police, but their minds changed about how people react toward the police, how the police react toward the individual. And I have a lot of confidence that we're going to see good changes out of this. It's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to get everything we want. But it's just wonderful to see that we have community people who are willing to give up so much time and who came in, a lot of them was closed minds, but realized that you have to listen. So I want to thank you all very much. I've done a ride-along. It's amazing when you do a ride-along. I went through the simulation. That was very interesting. I did that before. So I just want to thank you all, and I look forward to really delving into the recommendations. And I thank you all for participating in this. And I know we're going to see good things come out of it. And we do have a great police force. You know, it's just like in any, you have good councilmen, you have bad council people who are maybe not so good. But we all have to, you know, you have teachers that are good, you have some that aren't. You can't expect everybody to be perfect. But I think this was a huge step in getting toward what we hope is a understanding. And we're not going to, I hate to say this, but we're not going to see no more deaths from police shootings. That, unfortunately, that's probably something we're going to see. We might not see as many, we might see less, hopefully, but I just am impressed by the people who took their time, by the people who talked today, and I want to thank you all for what you did, and I know you're going to make a difference.
Thank you. Councilmember Madrigal.
Just want to say a quick thank you to all the committee participants and for their time. And just wanted to share that after listening to everyone, because I definitely wanted to sign up to listen, and I feel a renewed sense of hope about future community and police relations.
Right. Thank you very much. Councilmember Ricky.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Madrigal in that this committee worked hard. This committee was a really diverse group of people with different ideas, and I'm very proud of the work you guys did. But if there's one thing that's clear to me after hearing like the conversations tonight, is that making this happen is going to be a process for this city and a process for this council. And so I know your work is done, but I just want to invite you to participate in the upcoming workshops that are going to be happening. And I feel like a lot of questions were answered tonight, but your insights on your experiences over the last year are going to be absolutely critical in terms of why you made the recommendations you did. And when we're going over all these specific things, I just think it'll be really helpful to have your insights in the work groups that we're going to have in the future to make this thing happen. What's important is that we as a council make the right decisions for this community, and the wisdom that you guys have from all those hours you spent in those rooms making that happen is going to be really invaluable. So I know you're done, but I would just really encourage you to keep holding the torch until we get this over the finish line. Thank you.
I will, Councilmember Scudia Brayton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I remember very clearly, as if it were yesterday, when this concept, this initiative was born. It was over a year and a half ago, as many people have referenced. But I very clearly remember that there was no preconceived notions, no intended outcomes. There was nothing but a desire to improve our police-community relations and build trust. And when this was transferred over, this immense responsibility was transferred over to the committee, we just didn't know what conversations were going to take place, what was going to ultimately, what recommendations were going to come forth. We freely transferred this over to the committee, and not knowing, there was a lot of anxiety with that. But we felt confident that everyone was represented on that committee. So given that the community was represented in that committee, there was some comfort in knowing that even though the conversations weren't going to be necessarily easy, that they were going to be balanced in perspective. And I definitely gather that from what everyone communicated today. I heard there was divergent points of view, but there was a lot of respect in having that dialogue. And I'm just so immensely proud of just that process and how everyone really took that process to heart. I've heard so much respect from everyone today in their perspective, and they just stated their perspective. They didn't downplay anyone else's perspective, whether it was the same or not. So I know it wasn't an easy process, and like others have said, it was at an expense to your personal lives, and for that I'm very, very grateful. So thank you for the entire committee, and thank you to our facilitators, that without them, that process would not, we wouldn't be at this point here, because that kind of conversation could have gone all kind of crazy and ended up who knows where. But here we are with a product that has meat on it, and it's very thoughtful meat. And so that's just, I feel a heavy sense. I feel you transferring that immense sense of responsibility over, and it's now on our shoulders. And I welcome that because the right people did the work, and you've invested a lot of your time. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that. Now we gladly accept it, and we will, I hope we are able to do an equal amount of, I hope we're able to do I know that we will do the due diligence necessary to get the job done that you all have started. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for bringing it to this point. The work you have started will continue through us, and I know you all are going to hold us accountable, I look forward to continuing to dialogue with you all. I just want to say, though, in closing, the council was very intentional in not being part of the process, because this wasn't the council's anything other than providing you a desire to have this conversation and coming back with recommendations. But we heard and we listened and we heard and we listened from the beginning to now. And we have we've all taken mad notes throughout this entire process, and we've taken things to heart. And now we need to do the hard work that you all have started and implementing what needs to get implemented. So once again, thank you immensely for everything you've done for your service and for the community here in Modesto.
All right, I'll try to wrap it up with my comments and say that for me, this is comes from a lot of personal experience in the community. So it was not only based on our national events that were happening at the time and local events. When we first moved back to Modesto in 1982, after my husband's schooling and my nursing school, and I was hired in the emergency room at Doctor's Hospital, and this was 1982. Part of to be an emergency room nurse was to ride ambulance, as we called it, so to be out in the field. We also, in the emergency room at Doctor's, drew every blood alcohol level from every person that law enforcement brought in that was arrested for DUI. When I did go on these calls over and over and over again, law enforcement would look at me and say, "Sue, these patients are so mentally ill, I'm not trained to care for them." And they would be relieved when we would arrive. And all those years, I thought, we need to help. Like, this is not right. We need to work together. And so this is decades and decades of watching this happen as a mobile intensive care nurse, with my patients, with patients that had been arrested for DUI, de-escalating those situations, working side by side with law enforcement. That's what we did. So that is part of what brings me to this place where I am so grateful that we are really going to make an impact in our community. This is really going to make a difference. I want to end by thanking Will again. All of you that were on the committee were volunteers, and he took on the responsibility of leading these efforts. And I so appreciate you for doing that. You have a gift. I just firmly believe that everyone was in this place at the right time. The people and our experiences that came together is truly something to be grateful for and proud of. It was a huge responsibility. So thank you once again, and that's how I will end this tonight for my comments. So, following tonight's workshop, city staff will bring this item before council to receive the Forward Together work group's report. Council will provide future direction regarding the prioritization, research, and development of the various recommendations. And in response to one of the questions that we had, this will take time. I cannot give you a specific timeline. It's just going to take time. Thank you again to the Forward Together work group for your commendable efforts on this very important work. And I also appreciate council's support of this endeavor and the community's participation in the process and at tonight's workshop. Before we finally end, I wanted to ask Brandon Gillespie, our police chief, if he would like to make a few remarks. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and Forward Together Committee. I'll be brief. Those that know me will be appreciative of that. But one thing I just wanted to say is express my appreciation to you, the Forward Together Committee, but also tell you that maybe your formal work is over, but your work is not over. Through this process, Mayor, I think the name was perfect, Forward Together, because as the police chief and being in law enforcement for 21 years, I can tell you we don't do this alone. The best way, in my opinion, to provide police services for a city is to do that together with the community and the police. And as I've said many times before, it comes down to relationships. It's all based on relationships. At a bigger level, at a community versus police, when you talk about it at more of a macro level, but then it comes down to individual relationships with our police officers in our communities, not just me. But it does come down to the relationships, and there's many people in this committee I either didn't know or didn't know well, and now they're people that were chosen as stakeholders, as representatives of groups that came together, and now I have those connections to continue to talk to. So when I say the work isn't over, there'll always be topics, there'll always be conversations to be had, and I expect that we're going to have those conversations. And that we can sit down and as Michael talks about, it's not about convincing or letting go of opinions and thoughts. It's about having those discussions to make us better together as a city. So I just really want to express my appreciation for this process. The Modesto Police Department will always be a learning organization. It'll be always something that we can do better and always try to get better. The minute we get complacent, the minute we failed our community, and we will always continue that. But I can tell you that it is an honor and a privilege to be the police chief for this department. We have amazing men and women who go out and really try to serve this city with their best foot forward and do the darn best they can. So I just, if the Forward Together initiative in this committee is any prelude to the things that are going to come, because this is just the beginning. This conversation continues, and we'll continue to get better together. And I just really appreciate wanting to take just a few seconds to express that appreciation for this entire process, and for you, Mayor, for making this all happen and bringing this initiative together. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Again, I appreciate all of your work, Forward Together work group, for your commendable efforts, and I also appreciate the council's support of this endeavor and the community's participation in the process and tonight's workshop. Are there any matters too late for the agenda? All right, seeing none, I am calling this meeting of the City Council adjourned.